The teacher accused the boy of lying when he said his father worked for NASA. But what happened during the parent-teacher conference left the whole room speechless. The moving truck pulled away from the curb with a heavy groan, leaving behind faint tire tracks on the clean concrete and a family of 3 standing under a pale, overcast sky. The house behind them had just been painted in a neutral, marketable shade of beige. It looked identical to every other house on the block. Neatly trimmed lawn, identical shrubbery, a driveway so narrow you had to step carefully to avoid brushing the hedges. Even the mailbox looked untouched, too polished to feel lived in. This was Maple Ridge, Ohio, a suburban cul-de-sac that seemed engineered to be unremarkable. Every house followed the same layout. Every yard displayed a flag on the porch. Every neighbor waved from just far enough away not to invite conversation. Nothing looked out of place, because here, nothing was meant to be. For Marcus, standing with his arms crossed on the driveway, this was a new beginning. A clean slate. He was 12 years old, lanky in a way that hinted he'd grow tall soon, and already wearing the solemn expression of a boy who'd been told one too many times to keep it down. He scanned the street with quiet calculation. Behind him, his mother Deja adjusted her sunglasses on her head and wiped her forehead with the sleeve of her hoodie. She looked at her husband Darren with a long exhale. "Well," she said, "I guess this is home now." Darren grinned. He had the easy confidence of someone used to walking into unfamiliar spaces and making them his. He clapped a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "What do you think, kiddo?" Marcus shrugged. "It's quiet." Deja smirked. "That's the idea." They started unloading what was left in the car. A few boxes, a backpack, a folded science fair poster board that Marcus had insisted on bringing, even though the event had happened over a year ago. Across the street, a neighbor peeked out from behind lace curtains. Another one stepped onto their porch and waved briefly before retreating inside. The new family didn't take it personally. They were used to first impressions. Later that afternoon, after the last box had been brought inside and the obligatory pizza had been ordered, Marcus walked into what would be his new room. The walls were bare, the carpet smelled faintly of new paint, and the ceiling fan clicked with every rotation. He sat on the floor and opened a box labeled "School." Inside were notebooks, pencils, his old lunchbox, and a photo in a cracked frame, him and his dad standing outside a giant satellite dish. Marcus smiled and set it on the windowsill. He didn't know it yet, but that photo would soon become more important than he could imagine. The next morning, Marcus walked into a new school, wearing jeans, a NASA hoodie, and a backpack that still carried crumbs from last year's granola bars. He found his classroom, took the 3rd seat in the 2nd row, and kept his eyes forward. The teacher, Mrs. Hamilton, was cheerful in the way some teachers are when they're trying to overcompensate. Her smile was too wide, her tone too bright. "We have a new student today," she announced to the class. "This is Marcus. Let's all make him feel welcome." A few murmured greetings. One kid gave a small nod. Most just kept looking at their notebooks. As the day went on, Marcus kept to himself. He answered questions when called on, ate lunch alone, walked the halls like a shadow. It was during 4th period science that things began to shift. The teacher, Mr. Kessler, had assigned a group discussion about careers in STEM. The prompt was simple. What do your parents do, and how does it inspire your future? Students went around the room, listing the usual answers: accountant, nurse, mechanic, realtor. When it was Marcus's turn, he hesitated. Then he said calmly, "My dad works for NASA." There was a pause, then laughter. It started with one snort in the back corner, then spread like wildfire. A few kids didn't laugh, but they didn't speak up either. Mr. Kessler chuckled too. "NASA?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "That's quite the imagination. What does he do there? Drive the spaceships?" Marcus's face stayed still, but his ears burned. "He's an aerospace systems engineer," he said quietly. "He works on satellite communications and propulsion modeling." The room went silent. Kessler blinked, then with a smirk said, Well, we've got ourselves a little astronaut in the making. More laughter. Marcus didn't respond. He just stared at the page in front of him, eyes unmoving, hands clenched in his lap. And right then, he made a decision. He would let the facts speak for themselves. They would all see, soon enough. While trying to suppress the blush that crept up his neck, Marcus stood in the kitchen, more than ready. His mother carefully packed his folder into his backpack, the one with the solar system print that he only used on special occasions. She checked the zipper twice, pressed the sides, made sure it looked full and tidy. Then she kissed the top of his head, lingering for just a moment. "You've got this, baby," she said. "Just be you." At school, the hallways buzzed with chatter and nervous energy. Posters lined the walls, crayon-colored pictures of parents behind desks, steering wheels, with stethoscopes and laptops and tool belts. It was career day, and everyone had something to prove. Marcus walked through it all, clutching his backpack just a little tighter. A few students glanced his way, then quickly looked away. Some still didn't remember his name. Others did, but only as the new kid, the one who claimed his dad worked for NASA. Mrs. Blake stood at the front of the room with her clipboard in hand. Her lips were pursed in their usual thin line. Her blouse was a shade of beige that matched her voice. "Class," she called, clapping once. "Eyes up here." They quieted. "Today we'll be hearing from a few of you about your parents' professions," she said. "Remember, be concise, be respectful, and above all, be honest. No exaggeration, no jokes." Her eyes paused a half-second too long on Marcus. He caught it. Everyone did. Presentations began. One by one, students stepped to the front and shared their stories. Some beamed with pride. Others read stiffly from note cards. A few parents were even invited to join them, waving awkwardly, smiling for phone cameras. Marcus waited, watched, and when his name was called, he rose without hesitation. He walked to the front, unzipped his backpack, and pulled out a folder. From inside, he withdrew 2 sheets of paper and a laminated photo. He faced the class. He didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize. "My father," he began, "is an aerospace systems engineer." A few chuckles. One kid whispered something under his breath. Mrs. Blake raised her hand for quiet, but the doubt had already taken root. Marcus held up the first paper, a printout of an official NASA team directory, his father's name highlighted. Then the second, a program from a public tech conference listing his father as a keynote speaker. Finally, he held up the photo. It was him and his dad in front of a satellite dish the size of a house. His dad had one arm around him and the other pointing skyward. "My dad helped design the propulsion systems for the Europa probe," he said. "And he's currently leading a team working on Mars communication protocols." Silence. Not stunned silence. Ashamed silence. Mrs. Blake's cheeks had gone pale. She cleared her throat but didn't speak. Marcus returned to his seat without another word. After class, a few students lingered near his desk. One muttered, "That's actually really cool." Another asked, "What's Europa?" And for the first time, Marcus didn't feel like the new kid. He felt like someone they finally saw. He took the seat by the window, the one no one else ever chose because the sunlight poured in too hot during midday. It suited Marcus fine. With his back to the rest of the room, he could almost disappear. He pressed into the corner, headphones in but silent, eyes fixed on something outside no one else could see. The folder from career day never left his backpack, but he stopped opening it. The photos he had printed and laminated with pride were starting to curl at the corners. The picture of his father in a flight suit, taken during a tour at Kennedy Space Center, had a crease now, running diagonally across his smile. He didn't show it to anyone anymore. He didn't talk about it at all. At home, he still came downstairs for dinner, still took out the trash, still completed every homework assignment. But it was different now. The light had dimmed. It was in the way he moved, quieter, slower, like someone had been unplugged at the source. His mother noticed first. At first, she asked soft questions. How was school? Did anything happen today? You okay, baby? Then she asked more directly, What's going on? He gave the same answer each time. I'm just tired. I don't want to talk about it. He said these things with a shrug that was almost believable, but only almost. Deja knew better. She sat across from him one evening at the kitchen table, watching him push macaroni in lazy circles around his plate. Across the room, Darren had just ended a call with a colleague at the Jet Propulsion Lab. He was talking animatedly, full of the same excitement he always carried after those calls. Marcus didn't look up once. After a while, Darren noticed. Marcus, he said, everything all right? Fine, came the response. One word, automatic, but it wasn't fine. Darren caught Deja's glance. She gave a slight shake of the head, a silent message. Give it a minute. So they did. The days passed. Marcus grew quieter. He stopped wearing the NASA hoodie, stopped raising his hand in class, stopped making eye contact. At school, some kids had started calling him Space Boy. Others had simply ignored him altogether. But he carried the silence like armor. Then, one evening, Darren came into his room carrying a shoebox. Can I show you something? He asked. Marcus shrugged. Darren sat beside him on the bed and opened the box. Inside were old badges, flight plans, patches from different missions. This one, he said, holding up a faded cloth triangle, was from the Europa pre-launch. Your mom sewed it onto my backpack. Marcus glanced at it, then away. Darren waited, then said, You know, when I was in school, I didn't know anyone who looked like me who worked in science. No engineers, no pilots, no one in aerospace. Marcus looked at him finally. Darren continued. So when people doubted me, when they laughed, I understood it, but I didn't let it stop me. Marcus stared at the badge. I'm not ashamed, he said softly. I'm just tired of fighting to be believed. Darren nodded. I know. Then he placed the badge in Marcus's hand and closed his fingers gently around it. Then let them see it for themselves. Mrs. Blake sat behind her desk wearing that familiar professional smile, the kind that hovered just below genuine. It was the same smile she'd worn when she first greeted Marcus on his first day, polite, controlled, a little too tight around the edges. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, she said, gesturing toward the chairs in front of her desk. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. The chairs, like everything in the room, were scaled for children, too low, too narrow, just awkward enough to tilt the balance of power before the conversation even began. Still, Darren Collins sat down smoothly, the folder in his lap pristine and carefully held. His wife followed, composed, her spine straight, her gaze calm but alert. Mrs. Blake folded her hands neatly atop her desk. I understand you had some concerns about Career Day, she began. I'm glad we have the opportunity to clear up any misunderstandings. That word again, misunderstanding, as if what had happened to their son had been an accidental bump in the hallway rather than a public dismissal of his identity and truth. Darren didn't flinch. He simply leaned forward slightly, voice even. Our son came home last week confused, embarrassed, and humiliated, he said. He told us that when he spoke about my job during Career Day, you implied, publicly, that he was lying. Mrs. Blake opened her mouth. I only asked for clarification. He held up a hand, not rudely, just firmly. He said you laughed, that you rolled your eyes, that other students laughed with you. Her fingers twitched once before she clasped them tighter. I didn't intend. I'm not here to talk about intent, Darren said. I am here to talk about impact. Silence stretched between them. Deja finally spoke. Do you know what it feels like to be 12 years old and have your teacher laugh when you talk about your parents with pride? Mrs. Blake looked down at her hands. No, she admitted. I don't. Darren reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph. Marcus standing with his father in front of a NASA sign, then a printout, his name listed in a research paper's credits, then a certificate, official NASA stationery, Darren's name etched in bold. He laid them out, one by one, like puzzle pieces. "This is who he is," he said. "This is who we are." Mrs. Blake didn't speak. She simply stared. Darren leaned back slightly. "You don't have to apologize to me, but you do owe him one." And for the first time in the conversation, Mrs. Blake looked truly unsure of what to say. That was a start. She gave a small nod, not the kind teachers usually offer to acknowledge a student's presence, but something else. Something softer. Something more intentional. Jaden caught it as he entered the classroom. He didn't react, just gave a small nod of his own, careful to keep it small enough not to invite questions. He walked to his desk, slid into the seat without a sound, and kept his eyes fixed on the top corner of his notebook. The room filled slowly, the scrape of chairs on tile and the murmurs of half-awake students echoing softly. Emma took her place to his right, gaze fixed forward, posture unusually straight. Colin dropped into the seat to Jaden's left with his usual slump and leaned toward the kid behind him to whisper something. Jaden didn't try to hear, didn't try to care, but something in the room was different. It hung in the air, weighty but quiet. Not tension exactly, more like a current waiting to break. Some of the students had noticed that Mrs. Blake had been acting different since yesterday. She had returned from the conference quieter than usual. She didn't scold anyone at dismissal, didn't chase after forgotten homework slips, just gave instructions in a tone that sounded tired, thoughtful. Today that tone was still there, maybe even deeper. Mrs. Blake stepped to the front of the room, her usual red pen still clipped to her blouse. She placed the dry erase marker back in its tray with a small clack and turned to face them. "Before we begin our regular lessons," she said, adjusting her glasses, "I want to take a few minutes to talk about something important." Her eyes scanned the room. Briefly, they paused on Jaden, then moved on. She took a slow breath. "Last week during career day, one of our students shared a bit about their family, about their parents' work and what it meant to them. That student was brave, honest, proud." She paused. Jaden didn't move. "I didn't respond the way I should have." The words landed quietly but clearly. No embellishment, no qualifiers. A few students shifted in their seats. Emma turned, eyes wide. Mrs. Blake continued. "In the moment, I made a comment. One I thought was humorous, lighthearted, but it wasn't received that way, and it shouldn't have been. Because in trying to be casual, I dismissed someone's truth." She turned then, fully, and looked at Jaden. "I dismissed your truth." A silence swept the room. Jaden blinked. Mrs. Blake didn't break eye contact. "I want to say publicly that I was wrong, and that I'm sorry." It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was real, and it mattered. She stepped back, letting the weight of her words settle, then, with a small nod, returned to the board and picked up the marker. "We'll be covering integer operations today, but before we start, are there any questions?" For once, there weren't. But something had changed, something important. And Jaden? He didn't smile, but he didn't look down either. They were still thinking about it on Monday, the apology, the way Mrs. Blake said it, the way she didn't hide behind language or bureaucracy, the way she named what happened without dressing it up in excuses. It lingered, not just for Jaden, for everyone. By the time first period started, something in the classroom had shifted, not dramatically. No music swelled, no banners dropped, but it was there, in the quiet glances, in the way students carried their notebooks with more purpose, in the stillness that preceded the bell. Jaden sat in his usual seat, window to his right, Emma beside him, Colin behind, Mrs. Blake entered the room with her usual stack of papers, but her posture held something lighter, less guarded. She placed the stack on her desk, then turned to face the class. "For today's warm-up," she said, "I want you to reflect on something we remember from Friday." Groans were minimal. Jaden blinked. The questions written on the board weren't just fill-in-the-blanks or memorized facts. They were open-ended. "What surprised you the most about the Artemis mission? How does seeing someone like Mr. Collins in that role change your view of space exploration? What questions do you still have? Around the room, students read the prompts, then bent over their desks, not reluctantly, not under protest, but with something close to enthusiasm. Several leaned in, brows furrowed in concentration. Emma tapped her pencil against her lip, deep in thought. Colin whispered, "What if I said I was surprised space wasn't quiet?" Jaden didn't reply. He was already writing. His pencil moved across the paper before he realized he'd started. Something had opened in him. After the warm-up, Mrs. Blake transitioned into a new unit, one the class hadn't expected. She announced it casually, though her eyes shone with effort and care. "For the next 3 weeks," she said, "we'll be working on a space-themed research project. Each of you will choose a topic: past missions, future goals, the technology we use, the people involved. At the end, we'll host a space discovery day." There were murmurs. "Like a science fair?" someone asked. "Sort of," Mrs. Blake said, "but with a twist. You're not just reporting, you're storytelling, teaching, creating something that makes someone else curious." Even the skeptics looked intrigued. Jaden's fingers tightened around his pencil. This was more than an assignment. It was an invitation. And this time, he was ready to step forward. Jaden sat alone in the classroom during lunch, a little earlier than necessary, watching the clock and listening to the hum of overhead lights. For 5 minutes, the only other sound was the occasional clang of trays down the hallway. He had set out a few things on a side table: pamphlets about Artemis, a folded poster of the solar system, and 2 sheets of NASA stickers his dad had mailed him from a training event in California. He didn't expect much. Maybe 1 or 2 people would come. Maybe no one. But he'd made the announcement. He'd taken the step. The rest would come, or it wouldn't. The door creaked. Matthew poked his head in, half a granola bar in one hand and a juice box in the other. He stepped inside, looking around like he wasn't sure if he was breaking a rule. "This it?" he asked. Jaden gave a small shrug. "So far." Matthew plopped into the chair next to the desk without further comment and began flipping through a poster on Martian terrain. A few minutes passed. Then Emma walked in. She didn't speak, just gave Jaden a nod and pulled a chair near the window. A 6th grader wandered in next, his backpack still on, looking confused but curious. Jaden didn't know his name, but he waved him in anyway. Then the door creaked again. Colin entered, holding a tray and trying to act casual, like he'd made a wrong turn but decided to stay. He mumbled something about only being here because the cafeteria was too loud, and sat by the wall. Jaden smiled to himself. It was a start. By the end of lunch, 7 students had gathered. Some talked, some listened. One asked a question about black holes that sparked a half-hour conversation and 3 impromptu Google searches. No one checked the clock, and when the bell rang, no one left right away. Jaden stood a little taller that afternoon, because now it wasn't just an idea, it was something real. And then, what came after, at home, was just as important. The changes didn't announce themselves loudly. They crept in like light through a curtain, subtle, warm, consistent. Jaden had started spending more time at the coffee table in the living room, not with a phone or a game controller, but with paper. Dozens of sheets, folded, taped, sketched. Some had designs for rockets. Others were just lines, trajectories, orbits, maybe paths only he could understand. One evening, Darren came home from work, briefcase in one hand and fatigue across his shoulders. He saw Jaden bent over a sketch, tongue between his teeth in concentration. "You've been quiet," Darren said. Jaden didn't look up at first. He made one last pencil stroke, then leaned back, blinking like he'd just remembered the world was there. "Thinking," he said. Darren set his things down, kicked off his shoes, and sat beside his son on the floor, back against the couch. "Tell me," he said. Jaden hesitated. He looked down at his drawing, something half rocket, half dream, and ran his fingers along the edges. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't said anything? He asked. If I just let it go? When she said I was lying. Darren's face didn't shift, but his hand settled gently on his knee. His fingers tapped a steady rhythm, like a countdown or a signal. I do, he said quietly. Sometimes. Jaden turned his head slightly. And? I think, Darren said, that it would have made you feel smaller. Maybe for a day, maybe a week, but probably longer than that. He looked at his son, then added, and I think the silence would have grown louder, day after day, until it wasn't something you could ignore, until it felt bigger than you. Jaden looked down again. It almost felt easier to say nothing. His father smiled, not with amusement but understanding. It always does, he said, until the moment it doesn't. They sat like that for a while. No lesson, no speech, just the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, and a quiet between them that wasn't heavy. It was whole. And Jaden? He felt something settle in him, not closure, but clarity.